Welcome. Today we delve into one of the most pivotal moments in human history, the Normandy invasion of June 6, 1944. Behind the scenes of this colossal assault, unimaginable innovations and deadly defenses clashed in a battle that would change the course of the 20th century. Can you imagine a single explosive charge capable of turning 2-meter-thick reinforced concrete into mere rubble in seconds? Did the Germans truly believe their bunkers were impregnable, only to be blindsided by British tanks armed with flying dustbins? Were the relentless, high-pitched bursts of the MG-42 machine gun enough to paralyze entire attacking waves? And what secrets lay hidden within the meticulous concrete fortifications stretching along the coast? Walls poured in cubic meters, designed to withstand naval and tank assaults. Could the Germans' past failures at Dieppe and the formidable Hobart's Funnies, specialized assault vehicles loaded with demolition charges, have predicted the chaos to come? All these pieces form a vast, deadly puzzle. So how did the Allies plan to break through this seemingly unstoppable fortress? What secret weapons, tactics, and innovations were secretly prepared to turn the tide against the German defenses? In this video, we will uncover the truth behind the seemingly impenetrable Atlantic Wall, separating myth from reality, and reveal the shocking strategies that finally shattered Nazi defenses. The story you're about to hear is a chess match of ingenuity and firepower, so prepare to see history's most daring invasion in a new startling light. And now let's begin with the first chapter, where the battle for Normandy's coast was set in motion, and secrets that could have changed everything were quietly waiting to be unleashed. On the morning of June the 6th in the year of 1944, precisely at 6 o'clock, the coast of Normandy was a picture of tense anticipation and unwinking focus. Inside a solid, purpose-built concrete shelter, designated as Wider Stanza 73, Albridge's quiet yet vigilant fighter pilot Wilhelm Krauss tightly grasped the handles of his MG-42 machine gun. Through the narrow slit-like embrasure of his fortified position, his eyes tracked the restless, rolling gray waters of the English Channel, which stretched endlessly before him, shrouded in the early morning mist. Unbeknownst to him, looming just beyond the horizon, what was now considered the largest amphibious invasion fleet in the history of humankind was steadily assembling, its massive vessels cloaked in fog and prepared to change the course of history. This formidable fleet, with countless ships carrying thousands of soldiers, tanks, weapons, and supplies, had been inching forward since first light, completely unaware that British military engineers had pioneered a devastating new weapon. This improvised yet highly effective destructive tool was designed explicitly to neutralize bunkers like the one Krauss manned, a weapon capable of transforming fortified concrete structures into mere cardboard. The secret weapon, hidden within the depths of British ingenuity, was a formidable 40-pound demolition charge. When detonated, this explosive device could reduce a 2-meter-thick reinforced concrete wall into rubble and debris in a matter of seconds. Its destructive power so immense that even the heavily armored Churchill tanks loaded onto landing craft would be rendered almost useless against it. The MG-42, sometimes called Hitler's Buffalo, was renowned across the German front lines for its lethal efficiency. Capable of firing approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, its relentless sustained bursts could lay down a grid of fire with relentless precision, overlapping with other units along the Atlantic Wall. These coordinated fields of fire had been painstakingly planned and perfected over months by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who believed this extensive defensive network could hold back any Allied assault. Yet Wilhelm Krauss had no clue that across the Channel, the British had been secretly training and refining tactics against such defenses for over a year. Their secret weapon involved British 79th Armored Division's modified Churchill tanks, armed with 29mm spigot mortars, capable of launching projectiles they nicknamed the Flying Dustbin. These specialized shells could be launched from 80 yards away, directly through the narrow firing slits of German bunkers, destroying their defenses from within, effectively bypassing the sturdy concrete walls and cutting formations. German defensive warfare was centered around machine guns and fortified positions designed to rely heavily on the firepower of the MG-42. Each 10-man squad was essentially tailored and organized around servicing that singular, deadly weapon. These squads carried not just enough ammunition, but also spare barrels, which had to be replaced frequently when the gun overheated, at roughly every 250 rounds. The gunner, protected in his protected embrasure or bunker, was positioned to dominate an entire stretch of coastline, unleashing sustained fusillades of 79mm rounds that could swiftly inflict deadly casualties on attacking infantry and even decimate entire platoons in seconds if they were caught in the open. Months before the Grand Assault, in March of 1944, Krauss had witnessed the meticulous efforts of engineers and laborers, mostly French conscripts and Italian prisoners, pouring countless cubic meters of concrete. The concrete shield poured into the cliffs and shoreline in front of him created formidable walls measuring 3.5 meters thick, reinforced to withstand the relentless pounding of naval artillery and the ferocity of direct tank assaults. The embrasure, carefully angled to minimize target availability, was part of a carefully planned defense system designed to confuse and trap enemy forces. Inside these fortified positions at WN-73, near La Hamel, the Germans had installed some of their most potent remaining defenses, including one of the few available 75mm anti-tank guns, strategically supported by multiple MG-42 nests in reinforced concrete toebrooks, all meticulously built to create overlapping fields of fire. Small individual concrete bunkers, resembling mushroom caps scattered along the coastline, protected single soldiers as they waited in ambush. Each one was positioned precisely to cover blind spots, dead zones, and intersecting fields of fire designed to channel the enemy into kill zones. These highly coordinated defenses aimed to lead the attacking troops into carefully orchestrated trap lines, where modern German tactics depended on overlapping machine gun fields and the strategic use of terrain to maximize the kill rate. Prior to this invasion, the German military had studied past failures, such as the disastrous Allied landing at Dieppe in August of 1942. During that failed raid, Canadian Churchill tanks had been stopped cold on the beaches, unable to breach the defenses or climb the seawall. These early setbacks convinced the Germans that their newly reinforced bunkers and coastal defenses were impregnable, believing the improved fortifications rendered any Hobart's 79th Armored Division, famously known as Hobart's Funnies, gained notoriety during the Second World War due to their bizarre-looking yet highly specialized tanks, uniquely designed for various assault roles. By June of the year 1944, this formidable division had already produced a significant number, precisely 180, of specially modified assault vehicles known as Royal Engineers Assault Vehicles, or AVR-ES. Each of these formidable machines was equipped with multiple 8-pound demolition charges, weighing in at around 40 pounds each. These charges were powerful enough that a single well-placed hit could devastate a concrete bunker, obliterating it into shattered debris in seconds. Just 5 kilometers away to the east, at a location known as Wider Stannis 62, a young soldier named Hinrich Sao, only 20 years old, had been manning his machine gun, an MG-42, since before dawn had broken. Hinrich, the son of a humble farmer who had never before fired a shot in hostility or in anger, found himself in a perilous situation on what was named Omaha Beach by the Allies. He was positioned alongside Lieutenant Bernhard Firking in an observation post that overlooked the entire eastern sector of this expansive landing area. Interestingly, although the area was designated as Omaha Beach by the Allied forces, several sections of this beach would ultimately face advancing British troops from Gold Beach. The German defenses in this region had been reinforced only weeks prior, when the 352nd Infantry Division was repositioned to the coastline, tasked with stoutly defending these formidable shores. Despite their reputation as seasoned veterans, having fought on the brutal Eastern Front, they had never encountered a force equipped with the kind of specialized armor and weaponry that was about to be unleashed upon them. These new weapons were specifically engineered to counterbalance the strategic advantages held by heavily fortified machine gun nests, which had dominated offensive tactics on the battlefield since the earliest days of warfare. The MG-42 machine gun, in particular, had a psychological hold over Allied soldiers, inspiring both dread and awe. Its distinctive high-pitched ripping sound, reminiscent of tearing canvas or ripping fabric, caused many veteran troops to momentarily freeze, overwhelmed by fear when faced with its relentless noise. Despite the impact it had on the Allied troops, the German soldiers operating these weapons harbored their own fears, especially regarding the notorious flamethrower tanks they had encountered during fighting in Russia. But nothing in their prior combat experience had adequately prepared them for the destructive potential of the New Age weapons. A particularly intimidating threat was the specialized tanks capable of delivering 40 pounds of high explosive charge directly into targeted fortifications through carefully engineered firing slits. The operational mathematics behind the MG-42 machine gun was both simple and terrifying. When firing sustained bursts to prevent overheating, it could reach a rate of fire around 150 rounds per minute, a formidable volume of fire. Hypothetically, this meant that in just 10 seconds, a single MG-42 could unload enough rounds, about 32 per square foot of beach, to create firepower capable of halting even the strongest of assaults. This kind of concentrated suppressive fire had famously stopped Canadian troops cold at a site known as DEP. However, all this relentless and overwhelming volume of fire became meaningless when faced with a tank that could approach under its protective cover and eliminate entire fortified positions with one well-placed shot. On the Gothic Line in Italy, which stretched across the rugged Apennine Mountains, a similar stalemate prevailed. Bruno Hoffmann, an interoffizier in the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, had been holding a key position since the fall of 1943. He commanded his MG-42 from a narrow mountain pass near Monte Battaglia, a strategic bottleneck where the terrain funneled Allied forces into deadly kill zones that turned every meter of advancing troops into a slaughterhouse. Even amidst the treacherous mountains, British forces had begun deploying their own specialized armor, capable of withstanding the destructive fire raining down upon them. These armor units secured the ability to lay demolition charges and demolish fortified enemy positions that once seemed unassailable. The German paratroopers, who had been transformed from elite airborne troops into ground fighters following their unexpected victory at Crete, had become highly skilled at defensive warfare. They carefully positioned their MG-42s in interlocking fields of fire, carefully arranged to maximize their psychological and physical impact. This interconnected network of machine guns forced the advancing Allied troops to proceed through a deadly maze of interwoven fires that transformed hillsides into killing fields where few soldiers survived unscathed. The defenders, while masters of the defensive tactics, knew all too well that their defensive advantage would soon be challenged by the relentless and innovative armor and weapon systems that the Allied forces brought to bear in the ongoing struggle to conquer these heavily contested terrains. Soon enough, Krauss and his comrades would come to understand a harsh reality, that the solid concrete bunkers and earthen defenses they relied upon offered little true protection against the relentless onslaught of aerial and artillery bombardments, not to mention the unpredictable threat of flying debris and crumbling structures. In contrast, halfway across the earth, on the distant island of Okinawa, Japanese military engineers had been meticulously studying and adapting German defensive tactics, gleaned from battle reports and recent combat experiences. They had gone on to devise ingenious, multi-layered fortifications, some of which integrated natural caves, vast underground cavities that had been extensively expanded and fortified into formidable subterranean strongholds. Within these underground fortresses, formidable numbers of Type 92 heavy machine guns, an armament equivalent to the famous MG-42, were strategically placed. These weapons were arranged in complex, overlapping fields of fire, aimed at suppressing any approaching enemy forces from multiple directions. The Japanese engineers designed these positions with an intelligent layer of concealment, ensuring that they remained largely invisible to enemy reconnaissance until American troops had committed heavily to invading the kill zones. Their strategic planning was based on intelligence gathered from German reports about Allied armor capabilities and tactics, leading them to believe that their deep, well-fortified positions, some reportedly tunneled 30 feet into solid rock, could withstand any conventional demolition or assault without breaching. However, at this point in time, the Japanese military had yet to fully grasp that the Allies had developed their own specialized weaponry capable of overcoming such defenses. Among these innovations were modified Sherman tanks fitted with Navy Marquis flamethrowers, designed specifically to project jets of napalm and gasoline mixtures into the mouths of caves from a distance of up to 200 yards. an innovation that was proving to be highly effective against entrenched enemy positions underground. Meanwhile, dispersed just outside the defensive perimeter at Lou Hamel, as the morning of June the 6th progressed, Krauss was gradually becoming aware of the intensifying naval artillery fire approaching his position. From his vantage point, he could hear the deep, resounding booms of British cruisers, namely HMS Ajax and HMS Argonaut, sending shells hurtling overhead in staggering salvos. Most of these shells were falling behind his defenses, impacting well beyond his position, and thus failing to breach the reinforced concrete cover protecting his MG-42. This gave him a false sense of security. He was convinced that the formidable Atlantic Wall, as the Germans called it, would hold firm, just as Rommel, his commanding officer, had assured him. Yet he couldn't help but notice with a flicker of concern that the preliminary bombardment seemed lighter than anticipated. It was almost as if the Allies were being cautious, deliberately sparing their most destructive firepower for later engagement, perhaps to conserve their resources for the final assault or to draw the Germans into letting down their guard. This impression made Krauss uneasy. Although he stayed focused, his attention fixed on the helplessness of his sector, undeterred by a growing sense that the threat might be less overwhelming than initially believed. Next to him, the gun crew under Gerrit Muller's command operated with disciplined efficiency. Muller was in charge of the loader position, ensuring that the weapon was kept supplied with ammunition, while a man named Schutz managed the supply feeds and made sure hot barrels were quickly cleared to prevent jams. Given the MG-42's notorious tendency to overheat, the team had been rigorously trained to perform rapid barrel changes. Changing a hot barrel in less than 20 seconds was absolute critical to maintaining continuous defensive fire and avoiding deadly gaps in their coverage. Little did they suspect, however, that their positions' lifespans, specifically the time before destruction or isolation by determined enemy fire, would be measured in hours rather than days. At precisely 7:25 hours, the first wave of attacking British soldiers belonging to the 50th Infantry Division landed on Gold Beach, directly in front of Krauss's position. Almost immediately, Krauss responded with his MG-42, weapon system operating exactly as intended. He unleashed a hail of deadly fire, carefully controlling each burst to ensure the barrel did not overheat and to prevent any jamming. Swaths of lead slaughtered the advancing troops of the 1st Hampshire Regiment as they struggled desperately through the surf, their attempts to gain ground hampered by the disciplined, rapid bursts from his machine gun. Krauss maintained a relentless, methodical rhythm, 7 to 10 rounds each time, visually sweeping the beach and targeting any soldiers brave enough to push forward. His focus was absolute. He was entirely engrossed in defending his sector, unaware of the specialized tanks being unloaded just beyond his field of view. Tanks designed specifically to counter coastal defenses and underground strongpoints. The British forces had, after all, learned from previous experiences and intelligence teams that standard tanks had vulnerabilities when traversing beach terrain, especially against heavy anti-tank weaponry. Consequently, the Challenger-supported tanks assigned to the Gold Beach assault, the Churchill variants, had in the chaos of the battlefield, amidst the chaos of the fierce fighting and unpredictable movements, a certain scene unfolded that would remain etched in the memory of those who witnessed it. In a strategic reserve bunker, tucked away behind the main line of defense, the men of the 42nd Infantry Division monitored their surroundings with a mixture of anticipation and readiness. Among them was Offizier Henrik Knob, a soldier trained diligently in identifying the various armored vehicles he might encounter during the assault. His training involved studying recognition cards that showcased main battle tanks, such as the reliable Sherman with its standard 75mm gun, and the more formidable Churchill tanks known for their thick armor and robust armament. Still, when the first of the new wave of Churchill ETVRES began moving up from the beachhead, Henrik's trained eye was momentarily confounded. These vehicles were unlike anything he'd seen before, with their stubby, wide-mouthed guns that appeared almost comically disproportionate when compared to the sleek, long-barreled cannon of the Churchill tanks or the familiar profile of the standard Shermans. Their short, bulky barrels presented a stark contrast, almost toy-like, especially when seen from a distance, giving the impression that they belonged more to a child's playset than to an armored fighting vehicle. But behind that seemingly odd exterior was an arsenal of specialized weaponry designed for a specific purpose: demolition and assault support. The AVRES, short for Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, were equipped with a unique mortar system known as the petard. This heavy-duty weapon was the brainchild of Colonel Blacker, a renowned ordnance engineer previously responsible for developing the Blacker Bombard, a spigot mortar system used by the Home Guard. Blacker's design relied on a massive spring mechanism capable of absorbing and releasing a recoil energy of up to 20 tons. This ingenious feature enabled the mortar to recoil fully after each shot, setting the weapon into position for the next firing sequence with remarkable speed. The petard mortar could fire demolition charges weighing 40 pounds, designed to punch through heavily fortified structures like bunkers and braziers. Small firing apertures reinforced against attack. To achieve that level of precision and power, Colonel Blacker devised a system where the mortar was recoiled by the spring's energy, allowing for rapid successive fire in prolonged bombardments. Such a weapon was crucial in breaching obstacles and fortifications that traditional artillery couldn't effectively neutralize. To employ these specialized vehicles effectively, the British assault engineers assigned to the 79th Armored Division underwent vigorous training at the Assault Training School in Suffolk. There, they built functional replicas of German bunkers to practice close-quarters assault tactics. This involved learning to coordinate seamlessly with infantry and regular tanks so that while the tanks suppressed or diverted the enemy fire, the AVRES could move into position and unleash their demolitions with precision. This combined arms approach aimed to turn German defensive tactics against them by exploiting the predictable fields of fire created by their defenses, thus allowing assault units to navigate approach routes carefully protected by coordinated suppressive fire. Each AVRE was crewed by a team of 6 soldiers. 5 of these were Royal Engineers, skilled in demolition, rigging, and the handling of the petard mortar, while the 6th served as the vehicle's driver, an armored corps driver responsible for maneuvering the vehicle through complex terrain. A dedicated demolition non-commissioned officer, NCO, oversaw the loading and firing procedures for the mortar, a critical task considering the weapon's fragility and power. Among the most perilous roles was that of the co-driver, who had to open a sliding hatch and expose his hands to reload the mortar by breaking open the breech and inserting another 40-pound demolition round into the chamber. It was a task that required precision and courage, given that the metal surfaces of the tank and the crewman's exposed hands were under constant threat from enemy machine guns. The danger was reinforced by the thick, incessant crackle of gunfire, the deadly rat-tat-tat of machine guns firing continuously during the assault. For instance, at a location known as Widerstannis 36, near Nelsfeldwebel, an operational commander of an MG-42 machine gun position reported to his battalion headquarters shortly after the start of the invasion effort that he had fired over 3,000 rounds within the first hour of the attack. As the battle raged on, his crew worked tirelessly to keep their weapon fed with fresh belts of ammunition, the spent brass casings clattering and rolling across the bunker floor like percussion instruments in a chaotic orchestra of war. Amidst the chaos, the view suddenly shifted when Major Peter Sellery of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, supporting the British 8th Armored Brigade's inland advance from Gold Beach, observed a peculiar sight. He saw an AVRE approach, moving steadily forward, its stubby gun aimed directly ahead. At first glance, it seemed to be a vehicle carrying a bundle of logs or brushwood mounted on its front, a type the formidable strength of the British engineering units on D-Day was exemplified by their deployment of the Churchill AVRE, a specialized vehicle designed to breach heavily fortified German defenses. One striking demonstration of this was when a Churchill AVRE, armed with a formidable petard mortar, a device officially known by its designation, the #1 demolition bomb, was ordered forward with the task of demolishing a reinforced structure. This particular assault involved launching what could be described as a small, compact, flying dustbin, a nickname reflecting its appearance, aimed directly at the enemy's formidable defenses. The projectile struck just above the entrance of a heavily fortified house, causing an explosive collapse that resembled a carefully arranged house of cards tumbling into chaos. The impact caused the building to implode, releasing a torrent of debris, bricks, masonry, and shattered concrete into the courtyard below, and forcing the defending German soldiers, armed with machine guns, anti-tank weapons, and other armaments, into disarray. While this incident might read as a straightforward military achievement, its true significance lay in the psychological horror it inflicted on the German defenders who observed the weapon's devastating power firsthand. The impact was sudden and shocking, a stark display that no fortified concrete position was safe from such a weapon. News of this destructive capability spread rapidly among the defending lines, creating a deadly aura of fear and urgency. It became widely known that the British possessed a weapon capable of knocking out even the most durable concrete fortresses with a single discharge. As a result, several crews manning MG-42 machine guns abandoned their posts, unable to face the grim prospect of annihilation at the hands of this new and terrifying weapon system. An innovation which forced even hardened soldiers to reconsider their positions rather than risk certain death from an approaching AVRE that was protected by armor impervious to all but the most powerful direct hits. This remarkable projectile was officially designated as the #1 demolition bomb. Measuring approximately 636 millimeters in length and having a diameter of about 230 millimeters, it was filled with nearly 40 pounds of high explosive. Its design allowed it to penetrate reinforced concrete walls approximately 2 meters thick or more by entering through embrasures or openings and then detonating inside enclosures such as bunkers. Its internal explosion caused catastrophic destruction within confined spaces, turning them into deadly death traps. The blast wave, reflecting off the interior concrete surfaces, multiplied its destructive power, effectively pulverizing anything within. These devices provided a significant strategic advantage because they could be delivered from a distance, removing the need for soldiers to approach enemy fortifications under fire. Unlike previous methods where combat engineers had to manually carry and place satchel charges or demolition charges on foot across exposed terrain, often under heavy fire from machine guns like the MG-42. Compared to those earlier methods, which required soldiers to approach enemy strongholds on foot and risk their lives while manually placing explosive devices, the AVRE offered a safer alternative. These specially modified Churchill tanks, bearing armor capable of withstanding shells larger than smaller caliber guns, could deliver their destructive payloads from relative safety behind formidable steel protection. Only a direct hit from an 88mm gun could threaten the tank's integrity, making the AVRE a formidable and reliable tool in the assault. By dawn on D-Day, precisely at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, the first AVREs began their assault on German defenses along the beaches where Allied forces had landed. The British and Canadian troops swiftly moved into action, supported by elite engineering regiments. The 5th Assault Regiment of the Royal Engineers was arrayed alongside the 51st Division at Gold Beach. At Juno Beach, the 6th Assault Regiment worked in tandem with the 3rd Canadian Division, executing their demolitions and clearing operations. Meanwhile, the 42nd Assault Regiment supported the 3rd British Division at Sword Beach. Each regiment was equipped with dozens of these specialized Churchill tanks, each carrying a complement of carefully designed tools and weapons aimed to systematically dismantle German entries, bunkers, and fortified points that had previously appeared impenetrable. A remarkable episode unfolded within these early hours, when the 26th Assault Squadron, supporting the Canadian forces advancing at Juno Beach, managed to destroy no fewer than 6 prominent concrete bunkers within the first 3 hours of the landing. Among them was the infamous bunker codenamed Charlie Havre, commanded by Lieutenant Bill Dunn, which initially posed a formidable obstacle to the assault. This bunker had blocked a vital exit route from the beachhead and had to be neutralized. Although it was eventually knocked out, it became stuck in a shell crater, rendering it impossible to operate further and necessitating abandonment. Although the bunker was lost, this engagement underscored the devastating effectiveness of the AVRE's petard mortar against German fortifications, as it had demonstrated superior destructive capacity in a real combat scenario. Further inland, at Lou Hamel, a harrowing scene of intense combat and artillery fire unfolded. Here, German MG-42 machine guns, stored in well-fortified positions, had been Lieutenant Smith had sustained a grievous injury, yet the resolve within the Allied ranks refused to waver. After careful deliberation amid the chaos, the decision was made to encircle the formidable German stronghold at Lowell and launch a surprise attack from behind, an essential tactic aimed at catching the defenders unprepared. However, executing this maneuver proved to be a painstaking challenge, as it would require several precious hours of maneuvering under relentless enemy fire, each moment fraught with danger as the Germans stubbornly held their ground. The German defenses at Lowell presented an almost impenetrable obstacle to the advancing forces. Central to their fortified position was a heavily armored casemate housing a potent 75mm gun, which faced eastward with the strategic purpose of providing enfilading fire along the stretch of beach designated for the Allied landing. This formidable gun emplacement was protected by a massive concrete wall measuring more than 3.5 meters in thickness, constructed on the seaward side to withstand even the most determined assaults. Surrounding this core of defense, multiple positions occupied by MG-42 machine guns in the nearby buildings created a complex web of interlocking fields of fire. Any attempt to approach was met with a withering curtain of bullets, rendering the area increasingly a no-man's land, a death trap where almost nothing could survive, a reality vividly described by one seasoned British soldier who called it a complete kill zone. By mid-afternoon, precisely at 1500 hours, a specialized assault vehicle marching under the banner of the 82nd Assault Squadron of the Royal Engineers finally succeeded in reaching a promising position. It advanced cautiously, supported and protected by Sherman tanks from the Westminster Dragoons, which provided covering fire and kept the Germans distracted. The driver navigated skillfully through a maze of rubble, craters, and debris, steering with steady determination while the vehicle's commander coordinated infantry units to keep the German machine gun nests suppressed with small arms fire. This coordinated effort created a critical moment of distraction, just long enough for the massive Churchill tank to position itself within range of the enemy fortification. At this point, the tank's commander, Sergeant James Patterson, a coal miner from Durham who had volunteered for service in the Royal Engineers, carefully directed his vehicle to an exact spot about 75 yards from the main bunker. With meticulous attention, he traversed the turret until the stubby Petard mortar was aligned perfectly with the embrasure from which Krauss's MG-42 had been raining death for 8 interminable hours. Inside the tank, the crew was tense but poised for action. Despite relentless machine gun fire ricocheting off the armored hull, Patterson's loader, sapper Tommy Clark, was already opening the mortar's breech, ready to load the next high-explosive shell, a dustbin-shaped projectile, with practiced efficiency. The first petard round was unleashed with a thunderous explosion that reverberated through the bunker, shattering concrete and flinging fragments of reinforced steel outward like lethal shrapnel. The shockwave was so intense that everyone inside the bunker was thrown into a dazed silence, even though the structure itself remained unpenetrated. However, this was merely the beginning of the destruction. Clark swiftly prepared the next round, his hands moving automatically amid the chaos and gunfire echoing off the tank's armor plates. With unerring accuracy, the second projectile struck its target directly through the embrasure. The explosion inside the bunker was apocalyptic, dynamite unleashed in a confined, enclosed space. More than 40 pounds of high explosive detonated with ferocious force, producing a crushing overpressure that ruptured eardrums and collapsed lungs. The reinforced concrete walls, once considered shields of protection, ultimately transformed into a death chamber that amplified the destruction's intensity. The immediate consequence was the disintegration of Krauss and his entire crew in an instant, their bodies obliterated by the catastrophic blast that left nothing recognizable behind. An hour later, at 1600 hours, the same AVRE mounted another bold assault, firing a third petard round at the rear entrance of the main casemate of the Lou Hamel strongpoint. This shot was decisive and final. It silenced the 75mm gun that had inflicted so much carnage on the beach all day. The explosion was so deafening and powerful that it caused nearby German soldiers, caught in the surrounding positions, to abandon their weapons in shock and fear. Many of these soldiers fled desperately into the nearby village, where fierce house-to-house fighting persisted well into the night as the Allies hunted them down. ending a day marked by relentless combat. While the destruction of the primary bunker dealt a decisive blow to the German defense and effectively shattered their command structure at Lowell, the psychological impact was even more profound. The relentless assault, the massive explosions, and the complete annihilation of key positions sent reverberations through the entire German line. Survivors and remaining troops, witnessing the overwhelming force and destruction wrought upon their comrades and defenses, began to spread panic and disillusionment across the front. During the height of the conflict, a single word circulated among Allied forces, striking terror into the hearts of German and Japanese defenders alike. The name of the revolutionary British tank capable of obliterating any fortified position with a solitary shot. Such weapons, which could penetrate deep into concrete bunkers and demolition-proof structures with alarming ease, rendered previously deemed impregnable defensive lines into death traps overnight. The crews manning machine guns like the iconic MG-42, who had been assured that their thick concrete shelters could safeguard them against any enemy attack, suddenly found themselves trembling as their apparently indestructible fortifications could now be torn apart instantly. The profound shock of this realization spread swiftly through the German defensive ranks, sowing chaos and panic as they understood that their traditional methods of defense were no longer effective against the newer, more powerful weaponry. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles south in Italy, the German forces defending along the formidable Gothic line received troubling intelligence about the Allied invasion forces launching their assault in Normandy. As reports about the battlefront grew more detailed and alarming, it became increasingly clear that the Allies had introduced highly specialized tanks designed explicitly to neutralize heavily fortified positions. These vehicles, which gained notoriety and fear, could swiftly dismantle concrete emplacements that had, for months, seemed impregnable. Such revelations prompted General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, an experienced commander and strategic mind, to urgently request detailed intelligence reports concerning these new weapon systems. The urgency behind his request was rooted in the realization that their current defensive tactics might soon be rendered obsolete, and that adapting swiftly was a matter of survival, although by this stage, rapid innovation on the German side was proving too late. German engineers, facing the relentless advance of Allied armor, could offer only limited suggestions. They recommended dispersing defensive strongpoints into smaller, more scattered units to prevent entire sectors from being wiped out with a single, well-placed shot. They also advised avoiding concentration of forces at key points, knowing that a lone, lucky shot might disable them altogether. The morale of the German forces fighting alongside the Italians was further undermined by these developments. The RSI, Italian Social Republic units, already battling the psychological toll of intense combat, were especially demoralized by these reports. They had already witnessed the devastating impact of Allied specialized armor during the breakthrough at Cassino, where British Churchill Crocodile flamethrower tanks tore through fortified defenses that had stood for months. These flamethrower tanks, equipped with terrifying flame-throwing capabilities, combined with Australian and British specialized armor units, known colloquially among troops as blowtorch and corkscrew, created a scene of utter destructive brilliance that shattered enemy lines in a matter of moments and shook the nerves of all present. Across the vast Pacific theater on the island of Okinawa, the Japanese military leadership, which had been closely observing and analyzing German defensive tactics through their military attachés stationed in Berlin, initially dismissed reports of Allied bunker-busting tanks as simple propaganda. They held firm in the belief that their extensive network of cave fortifications, carved deep into solid rock formations and considered nearly impervious to conventional demolition charges, would withstand any assault. However, by April of the year 1945, their confidence faltered, and they faced an awakening of a different kind of nightmare. American Sherman tanks, modified during their transit into the theater, with flamethrowers supplied by the Navy's Civilian Base Support, CBS programs, systematically encircled and set fire to Japanese strongholds. These tanks employed a deadly mixture of napalm and gasoline, which flowed through the tunnel systems like a lethal liquid wave, devouring oxygen and generating temperatures soaring well above 1,000 degrees Celsius in a matter of moments. The Japanese defenders had carefully positioned their Type 92 in Type 96 machine guns at key underground portals, placing them in concealed cave entrances that commanded critical terrain routes. These machine guns, which fired with blazing rapidity, approaching up to 500 rounds per minute, created deadly kill zones, forcing American infantry units to call in for specialized armored support capable of breaching such formidable positions. This led to the deployment of the 173rd Tank Battalion, which had been fully converted into flamethrower tanks at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii by the time of these fierce battles. The defensive strategy orchestrated by Colonel Yahara for the Okinawa campaign incorporated lessons learned from German experiences in Europe, emphasizing the construction of multiple layered defenses. These nested lines of defense featured mutually supporting strongpoints capable of resisting not just physical destruction, but also psychological collapse. Yahara believed that even if some strongpoints were overrun, the overall defensive fabric would hold strong. Yet he was unprepared for the terror inflicted by the flamethrower tanks and their incendiary firepower. Many Japanese soldiers faced a horrifying choice: to choose death through suicide rather than succumb to the agonizing flames of the approaching Shermans. The American flamethrower tanks, designated CWS-PAH-4 under the jurisdiction of in the heat of battle, a particularly ruthless tactic emerged that even seasoned Japanese soldiers, known for their unwavering code of honor and resilience, found too formidable to withstand. This strategy compelled many to abandon their previously infallible positions, fortified defenses that soldiers had sworn to defend with their lives, often with little choice but to withdraw. It was a brutal, psychological blow that shattered morale and undercut the traditional notions of impregnable defense. Meanwhile, on the Normandy front, as the pivotal late afternoon of D-Day unfolded, German commanders found themselves under mounting pressure from increasingly alarming reports pouring in from frontline units. The reports described the relentless advance of British tanks equipped with seemingly unconventional weaponry, short-barreled, wide-gun tank units that were systematically dismantling bunkers in a matter of moments. These fortifications, painstakingly constructed over many months, had been considered nearly indestructible, yet they were falling rapidly to this new breed of armor. One of the commanding officers, General Major Wilhelm Richter, who led the 716th Infantry Division, was a first-hand witness to this danger, having seen an Allied AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, destroy a Tobruk-style bunker with a single, decisive shot. The structure simply obliterated in a cloud of dust and debris, leaving nothing behind but ruin. In response to this alarming new threat, the general promptly contacted headquarters in anticipation of coordinated action. However, the command chain was hampered by communication breakdowns. The field marshal in charge was still in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday, buoyed by weather reports predicting poor invasion conditions. This romanticized forecast led to an erroneous assumption, namely that the invasion would not materialize, or at least not that day, thus leaving the German high command in a state of paralysis. As a result, individual commanders were left to improvise in the face of an alien weapon system they had limited understanding of, which exacerbated the disorder and reduced the overall effectiveness of their response. The German field units, having survived the initial onslaught, increasingly fell back to secondary, less fortified positions. Yet these hastily constructed defenses provided even less protection against the formidable AVRES, robots armed with petard mortars that could drive straight up to their targets and unleash destruction at point-blank range. The demolition charges employed by these vehicles could turn machine gun nests into deep craters within moments, often annihilating entire squads with a single blast. The destructive power propagated through tangle of trenches and dugouts, leading to chaos and chaos-driven casualties across the line. German military doctrine, heavily centered around the deadly effectiveness of the MG-42 machine guns, had long regarded this weapon as the core of their infantry tactics. The typical infantry unit relied heavily on these machine guns, with riflemen functioning primarily as carriers of ammunition and personnel designated to change barrels when needed. An integration that created a potent, concentrated firepower. However, this tactical setup revealed a significant flaw when confronted with an enemy capable of disabling the MG-42 with a single well-placed demolition charge. Such vulnerabilities would prove decisive in the ensuing hours of combat. At a critical position designated as Whiter Stannis 62, a soldier named Hinrich Sello had been firing his MG-42 across the battlefield nonstop for 9 hours straight. Later accounts claimed he fired around 12,000 rounds and contributed to over 1,000 enemy casualties, though these figures were undoubtedly inflated by the frenzy of combat and the chaos of war. Ultimately, American forces from the 16th Infantry Regiment mounted a broad assault that penetrated the position around 8:25 in the evening, attacking not with heavily armored vehicles or specialized equipment, but through overwhelming numbers, relentless determination, and superior tactical patience. Sello survived the engagement by abandoning his position when ammunition supplies were exhausted, a move that saved his life, although his later accounts would spark controversy within military historiography. Published decades after the event, Sello's claim to have single-handedly halted the American advance was heavily debated, with many researchers questioning the veracity of his account. Still, what remains unquestionable is that the MG-42 emplacements at WN-62 and other fortified points along Omaha Beach endured longer than their counterparts defending other sectors, especially those facing British troops. The difference, experts assert, lay in the contrasting approaches to specialized armor. American commanders had rejected the use of Hobart's funnies, including AVRES, which had demonstrated remarkable effectiveness against German concrete defenses. Indeed, one of the crucial strategic misjudgments was the decision by General Omar Bradley to decline most of the specialized armored vehicles offered by the British. His acceptance was limited chiefly to the duplex-drive amphibious tanks known as DD tanks. At the same time, Bradley and others refused to deploy or support vehicles like the AVRES, Crocodile's flame-throwing tanks, and other specialized engineering vehicles that had proven instrumental in breaching fortified German strongpoints. Historians widely criticized this strategy, arguing that it contributed significantly to the near disaster at Omaha Beach, where on the first day of the invasion, American forces incurred losses totaling over 2,000 servicemen, many of whom fell victim to German MG-42 machine gun positions. These well-entrenched positions could have been swiftly neutralized with the use of petard mortars, specialized demolition weapons capable of destroying fortifications rapidly and effectively. However, the initial American strategy predominantly relied on traditional combined arms tactics, infantry units advancing alongside artillery support and standard tanks, all working in concert to suppress, neutralize, and ultimately destroy enemy strongpoints. This approach, while methodical, carried with it the heavy drawback of accepting significantly higher casualties. Soldiers had to personally assault heavily fortified positions that in many cases could have been dismissed with minimal risk through a precise detonation from a single petard round. In stark contrast, the Germans employed demolition techniques that proved devastatingly efficient. For instance, some British engineers could take out entire bunkers with charges weighing merely 40 pounds, effectively rewriting the calculus of assault. The German High Command's response to the emerging threat posed by specialized armor, such as the Allied armored vehicles equipped with heavy demolition capabilities, was heavily hindered by their inflexible military command structure. Communications were frequently disrupted by the superior air dominance held by Allied forces, as well as sabotage by French resistance partisan groups. Many German units received no warning about the arrival or capabilities of these specialized tanks until they had already come under attack, leading to chaos and panic among defenders. Such specialized vehicles, which withstood early expectations as nearly invulnerable, suddenly appeared as lethal traps, transforming what seemed like stalwart defenses into deadly death zones. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who commanded all German forces on the Western Front, later reflected that the appearance of such one-of-a-kind armor, designed specifically to break through concrete fortifications, rendered their entire defensive strategy fundamentally obsolete. Although he acknowledged the strategic peril posed by these new vehicles, he also lamented that even if the Germans had been aware of their impending introduction earlier, their strained resources and limited industrial capacity would have prevented development of adequate countermeasures or modifications to existing defenses. By sunset on June the 6th, the British 50th Infantry Division had made significant progress inland, advancing nearly 10 kilometers from their landing site at Gold Beach. With the assistance of AVRES and other specialized armor, they destroyed or seized dozens of German bunkers, pillboxes, and strongpoints, steadily diminishing the defensive depth of the Atlantic Wall. In contrast, American troops at Omaha Beach had only just managed to secure a tiny foothold several hours into the assault. They suffered catastrophic casualties while attempting to take heavily fortified positions that could practically have been neutralized by a single petard missile, a weapon that, if appropriately employed, could have prevented such horrors. The disparity in tactical efficiency did not escape the notice of American commanders, who, within weeks of the initial landing, began requesting British AVRE support for operations aimed at breaching formidable German defenses. However, due to their limited numbers, these specialized vehicles remained predominantly with British and Commonwealth units, and only a small fraction participated directly in the broader American-led campaigns. The psychological effects of the AVRE, the so-called flying dustbin, due to its distinctive appearance, extended far beyond its tangible destructive power. German soldiers, who had never even encountered such vehicles firsthand, could hear testimonies or observe faint signs of their impending arrival. Rumors and the mere anticipation of approaching AVRES prompted many German defenders to abandon fortified positions altogether, even without experiencing direct contact. This effect created a domino-like cascade of retreat and disorganization, fundamentally undermining the entire conceptual basis of the Atlantic Wall. The Atlantic Wall was originally built on the premise that concrete defenses could hold long enough for mobile German reserves to mount counterattacks. The swift and decisive destruction of these fortifications by AVRES and other specialized armor disrupted this assumption entirely, rendering many bunkers and gun positions effectively useless as defensive assets. For years prior to D-Day, the MG-42 machine gun was regarded as the cornerstone of German defensive doctrine, notorious for its rapid rate of fire, durability, and ease of operation since its introduction in 1942. Yet in the face of new threats such as the AVRE, capable of demolishing concrete emplacements from beyond effective firing range, the MG-42 seems suddenly rendered obsolete. Enemy units could neutralize both the weapon and its crew with a single well-placed shot, often from ranges that the MG-42 itself could not reciprocate against, prompting a fundamental rethinking of traditional defensive tactics and the effectiveness of fixed fortified positions. In the weeks following the Normandy landings, as Allied forces steadily advanced further inland through the bocage terrain of Normandy, AVRES continued to demonstrate their value in countering German defenses. Despite the challenging layout of the terrain, with its dense hedgerows and narrow roads, these specialized vehicles repeatedly contributed to the gradual erosion of German strongpoints and fortified positions. However, their effectiveness was often limited by close-quarters combat scenarios or by threats from. Throughout the course of the conflict, a new form of warfare emerged, characterized by precise artillery strikes targeting enemy positions concealed behind fortifications, especially those hidden from direct sight. Observers soon realized that the Germans, having meticulously studied the vulnerabilities of Allied armor, understood a critical tactical weakness. While the armored vehicles known as AVRES boasted formidable frontal protection, their sides and rear remained comparatively unprotected and vulnerable to attack from the flanks or behind. According to the official diary of the 79th Armored Division, by the end of June in the year 1944, these specialized armored vehicles, the AVRES, had played a significant role in demolishing more than 400 German defensive structures. These structures included sturdy bunkers, heavily fortified pillboxes, and reinforced buildings designed to withstand direct assault. The impact of these destructive efforts was profound, as each battleground cleared by an AVRE effectively saved lives, potentially dozens of American and Allied soldiers who would otherwise have faced dangerous, costly assaults conducted through conventional infantry attack formations. In response to the emerging threat posed by these armored demolishers, German military strategists devised various countermeasures to neutralize or diminish their effectiveness. One prominent strategy involved repositioning and orienting MG-42 machine gun nests deep within their defensive fields, instead of consolidating firepower into concentrated strongpoints. The rationale was to distribute and disperse the German machine guns over a broader area. making it more difficult for Allied demolition teams to take out multiple weapons with a single explosive charge. This dispersal of firepower was expected to render direct attacks less effective, but inadvertently introduced a new problem. These more spread out and less cohesive defenses became increasingly susceptible to traditional infantry assaults, especially under the cover of darkness or when combined with infiltration tactics. Some German commanders experimented with an innovative but risky approach, taking captured French tanks and transforming them into mobile bunkers. They did this by burying the tanks up to their turrets, converting the chassis into heavily fortified firing positions that could be relocated swiftly in response to battlefield developments. While this ingenuity initially appeared promising, the improvised nature of these defenses rendered them vulnerable to yet more potent weapons, petard mortars. These specialized mortars could easily pierce the weaker armor of the converted tanks and then detonate explosive charges inside the confined space with lethal consequences, effectively turning what was meant to be a hardened position into a death trap. Meanwhile, in the Italian theater of war, similar improvisations and tactical adaptations became evident. German forces retreating along the Gothic line abandoned their meticulously constructed concrete defenses in favor of more flexible and dispersed fighting positions, strategically placed among natural terrain features, hills, forests, and valleys, rather than relying on massive static fortifications. Although this approach increased the vulnerability of these positions, especially when British and Indian troops employed targeted patrols to infiltrate between defensive sites during night operations, the natural terrain allowed for rapid movement and concealment, complicating efforts to pin down enemy forces. The morale of the Italian RSI, Italian Social Republic troops, already battered by the fall of Rome and disillusioned with the futility of their cause, deteriorated further upon hearing reports of the continual development and deployment of advanced Allied weapons. Entire battalions chose to surrender rather than confront the terrifying combination of AVRES and Churchill crocodile flamethrowers, an infernal weapons system affectionately nicknamed I.O. Tribes Britannis by the Allied forces, a moniker highlighting the monstrous appearance and destructive capability reminiscent of mythical beasts. On the Eastern Front, particularly where the war against the Soviet Union was raging fiercely, the German military observed with increasing concern the Soviets employing similarly specialized armored units. These included modified T-34 tanks fitted with mine rollers designed to destroy landmines and auxiliary armament, as well as KV heavy tanks retrofitted with flamethrowers. Tactical innovations that indicated shared technology and strategic exchange between the Soviet and Allied forces. The sobering reality dawned on German planners. Their nightmares of facing formidable bunker-busting tanks on multiple battlefronts were becoming a grim reality by the autumn of 1944. This intensifying threat stretched the German defenses to their limits. The potentially catastrophic collapse of the Third Reich appeared imminent, accelerated by the relentless deployment of these advanced armored units across different theaters of war. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of the Pacific, the Japanese military command, based in Berlin, had become increasingly alarmed and frantic. Colonel Nishitichi, a senior Japanese officer, dispatched urgent telegrams back home warning that the conventional Allied tactics, centered on fortified positions and machine gun strongpoints, were now outdated and ineffective. He recommended that the Japanese adopt new defensive strategies focused on mobility and stealth, emphasizing the importance of remaining concealed and adaptable rather than relying solely on static defenses. However, by then, Japanese forces on the islands of Aniwa and Okinawa had already committed heavily to static, entrenched defenses that were designed to absorb and resist the anticipated American and Allied assaults. These fortifications, though formidable and throughout World War II, the strategic landscape revealed startling vulnerabilities in traditional defensive tactics, making it evident that no fortification, regardless of how well constructed or heavily armed, could remain impervious to innovations in assault weaponry designed expressly for demolition and penetration. A stark illustration of this principle emerged vividly during the Battle of Okinawa, where the Japanese imperial forces had devoted considerable resources and meticulous planning into erecting what was arguably the most intricate and formidable defensive network in the entire Pacific theater. Under the command of Lieutenant General Ushima Mitsuru, the Japanese 32nd Army constructed a labyrinthine system extending over 60 miles of interconnected tunnels, intricately carved into solid limestone bedrock. These subterranean passages, painstakingly designed, served as an extensive defensive infrastructure, with each tunnel strategically positioned and carefully aligned to provide overlapping fields of fire, enabling defenders to sweep any approaching enemy forces with deadly efficiency. What made these tunnels particularly disconcerting was their concealment, hidden beneath the surface until the invaders were irrevocably committed to advancing into the ambush zones, at which point their complexity turned into an inescapable death trap. This colossal effort in defensive ingenuity was arguably intended to produce an impregnable stronghold capable of repelling any assault. However, the arrival of the American 713th Tank Battalion, equipped with 54 Shermans specially modified into flamethrower tanks, shattered the illusion of invulnerability. These tanks, with their blazing incinerators, penetrated the underground maze with terrifying ease. Flame extended through the tunnels, piping through every passageway and air shaft, transforming the vast network of fortified positions into colossal crematoriums. Entire units of Japanese defenders, deep within their elaborate tunnels, were destroyed in walls of fire that consumed them entirely, revealing a brutal and stark truth. Defensive designs of such complexity could be systematically rendered ineffective through the relentless and focused application of specialized armored firepower. This sequence of events resonated powerfully within the highest echelons of military thought, particularly among German military strategists observing the Pacific conflict via their embassy in Tokyo. Their reports, transmitted ahead of Japan's ultimate surrender, contained a chilling acknowledgement. Static defenses, no matter how elaborate, had become fundamentally compromised. One report explicitly compared the Allies' tactics to the British innovations first pioneered at Normandy, emphasizing how the Western Allies had perfected the systematic neutralization of fortified positions by deploying specialized armor units capable of obliterating bunkers and strong points with precision-guided mechanisms, not by traditional artillery or infantry assaults alone. The implications were sobering. The German observers depicted a battlefield in which fortified defensive positions, once considered absolute, could be dismantled with ruthless efficiency, fundamentally challenging long-held doctrines. This realization marked a humbling and bitter recognition of tactical failure. For decades, the MG-42 machine gun, prized by German infantry as the ultimate battlefield instrument, had symbolized dynamic and decisive firepower, from the harshest sands of North Africa to the icy frontiers of the Arctic. Yet in an ironic twist, this iconic weapon found itself increasingly marginalized as new types of assault tactics rendered mobile, focused firepower more effective than static, suppressive machine gun nests. The battlefield icons of old, such as the MG-42, began to seem inadequate against novel forms of armored assault employing a simple yet devastating weapon, the spigot mortar. This weapon, diminutive enough to resemble a flying dustbin when fired, could penetrate the fiercest fortifications or bunkers with alarming ease, delivering destruction where traditional heavy weapons failed. The humbling demise of the MG-42 served as a reminder that no matter how legendary or well-established a weapon's reputation, technological and tactical innovations held the power to transform the meaning of battlefield supremacy. Ultimately, the profound influence of engineering vehicles, such as the Amphibious Vehicle Royal Engineer, AVRE, during the war extended far beyond the immediate destruction of enemy bunkers and the casualties inflicted. These specialized tools, designed explicitly to counter fortifications, fundamentally altered military planning and doctrine. Lessons learned during their deployment, most famously at Normandy, demonstrated that even the best defensive positions were vulnerable to precision assault crafts that could bypass or neutralize their strongest features. This realization challenged the very assumptions that had underpinned defensive strategies for generations and underscored a vital truth. No entrenchment or heavily fortified point could stand forever against a dedicated, technologically advanced assault designed specifically to overcome it. In the final analysis, Germany's long-standing reliance on the mighty MG-42 machine gun considered a keystone of their defensive doctrine, began to look increasingly fragile in the face of these technological upheavals. Nations had concentrated vast firepower into fixed positions, which in turn became their Achilles heel. These heavily defended points emerged as primary targets for innovative Allied armored units, equipped with specialized engineering vehicles that employed firearms, tools, and tactics previously deemed unnecessary. What once appeared as an indomitable bastion could now be swiftly reduced to rubble, illustrating that ingenuity and technological adaptation could transform an opponent's greatest strength into an unforgiving liability. This modern military forces continue to study the Normandy campaign as a quintessential example of specialized warfare, an intricate blend of technological innovation, tactical ingenuity, and strategic decisiveness, where advancements in technology and clever tactics overcame seemingly impregnable defensive fortifications. This campaign offers invaluable lessons on how innovative weapons and adaptive strategies can turn the tide of battle, even against formidable fortresses designed to withstand assaults. However, it is crucial to remember that the heavy human cost associated with these lessons, painstakingly paid in blood along beaches from the coasts of France to the distant shores of the Pacific, must never be overlooked or forgotten. These sacrifices serve as a sobering reminder of the devastating realities of war, underscoring the importance of strategic evolution and technological progress. Decades after the conflict, veterans of the German 352nd Infantry Division consistently identified the appearance of specialized armored engineering vehicles, known as AVREES, as the pivotal moment that signaled the imminent failure of the formidable Atlantic Wall. One survivor vividly recalled that their confidence in the strength of their defenses was shattered at that moment. He explained, "We had been told our concrete bunkers could withstand anything, that our MG-42 machine guns would mow down the British and Americans with relentless precision. Yet with the arrival of these strange armored vehicles, equipped with short-barreled guns, all that confidence crumbled swiftly. The concrete structures that had taken years to construct quickly appeared fragile, detonating and disintegrating as if made of paper. At that instant, the soldiers understood unequivocally that the war was, in fact, lost. This psychological blow, the dramatic collapse of confidence in defenses painstakingly erected over countless months, might have been the AVRE's greatest contribution to the Allied victory. It did not just demolish bunkers or fortifications, it shattered the willpower of defenders, stripping away the psychological barriers that kept them holding on. The reaction among Italian soldiers, particularly those fighting alongside Germans in the Gothic Line under the Italian Social Republic, IRSI, was even more visceral and immediate in its impact. Many units, facing the overwhelming power of Allied armored vehicles, as they called the Churchill tanks, nicknamed Idestrator or Destroyer, simply melted away rather than confront this terrifying new threat. Accounts preserved within Italian military archives vividly describe the complete demoralization that engulfed these defenses. Witnessing a single AVRE demolish a well-fortified strongpoint or a heavily defended position was enough to cause panic and hasten the retreat of entire units, leaving behind months of meticulous fortification work in ruins. The realization that no matter how formidable their fortifications were, they could be rendered useless in moments by the destructive power of specialized armor, inflicted profound despair. This wave of defeatism accelerated the collapse of Axis forces across Italy, compounding the strategic loss with its psychological impact. On the farthest reach of the Pacific theater, Japanese forces defending Okinawa displayed a similar psychological breakdown when faced with the new threat of American flamethrower tanks. Despite their deep cultural tradition emphasizing death before dishonor, intent on fighting to the bitter end, many soldiers made the unthinkable decision to abandon their positions, often under direct orders, to avoid being burned alive by these incendiary vehicles. Counts and testimonies describe soldiers fleeing in terror rather than confronting these terrifying weapons, which epitomized the unrelenting horror that the American military's technological advancements could unleash. This breach of Bushido, the traditional code of honor, highlighted how the psychological toll of these weapons transcended mere physical destruction and penetrated the very ethos of Japanese martial culture. The United States Army's Chemical Warfare Service documented that the mere appearance of flamethrower tanks could induce immediate surrender or withdrawal among defending units. An officer within the service noted that the psychological impact of these weapons was often 10 times more significant than the actual casualties they inflicted. The mere rumor of approaching flames or the sight of the tanks, often unseen until the last moment, would cause entire sectors of defensive positions to evaporate, leaving defenders in a state of panic and disarray. The terror evoked by these formidable weapons was so severe that it effectively facilitated strategic breakthroughs without necessarily requiring catastrophic physical damage. The progression of technological development, moving from the dominance and then obsolescence of the MG-42 machine gun to the advent of specialized armored vehicles, reflects a broader narrative of World War II's ongoing arms race. The progression exemplifies how each side's innovations, be it in firearm technology, armor, or specialized engineering vehicles, provoked counter-innovations in an escalating cycle of technological contestation. These cycles of innovation, driven by necessity and ingenuity, ultimately favored the Allies' industrial capacity to develop and rapidly deploy advanced, specialized weapon systems at scale. This dynamic of adaptation and counter-adaptation played a crucial role in shaping the battlefield outcomes of the conflict. The MG-42, with its revolutionary roller-locked mechanism and extraordinary rate of fire, initially appeared as the ultimate infantry weapon, an unstoppable force capable of mowing down enemies with relentless volume. When first introduced in the year 1942, military engineers had developed a remarkable fighting vehicle capable of independently overseeing and engaging vast portions of a battlefield. Its formidable presence allowed a single unit to threaten and demolish enemy defenses with unprecedented efficiency. Nonetheless, by the year 1944, this powerhouse had been rendered almost obsolete by a surprisingly simple contraption, a spring-powered spigot mortar that appeared almost medieval in its design and operation. This weapon, basic yet highly effective, suddenly changed the face of combat, exemplifying how ingenuity can outmatch even the most sophisticated machinery. The British 91st Armored Division, renowned for its innovation and daring, documented in their after-action reports from the Normandy campaign the destruction of over 342 major fortified positions during the first month of their operations. Each of these formidable successes often resulted in the loss of dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of German soldiers, highlighting the significant human cost saved through the deployment of such specialized vehicles. These figures painted a grim but compelling picture. The investment into these unique armored units had proved not only strategic, but morally justified as they contributed to reducing unnecessary Allied casualties. Meanwhile, German commanders, faced with these relentless assaults, desperately attempted to adapt their tactics, innovating to counter the emerging threats, but often to little avail. Leading the charge was Major General Percy Hobart, the innovator behind these unconventional armored vehicles. His approach, often considered unorthodox and even controversial within the British military establishment of the time, was ultimately validated by the undeniable success of his creations. Yet Hobart was quick to humbly attribute the squadron's achievements to the skill and bravery of the men who operated these unusual machines, emphasizing that the real heroes were the crews who faced fierce enemy fire and complex destructions head-on in their armored giants. Among these courageous personnel were legendary figures who became symbols of the campaign's ingenuity and bravery. Sergeant Bill Hawkins of the 26th Assault Squadron distinguished himself on D-Day by destroying 7 heavily fortified German bunkers with his Churchill tank, an exemplary feat, before his vehicle was disabled by a deadly 88mm anti-tank gun. Another was Lieutenant James Morrison of the 82nd Assault Squadron, who employed his armored vehicle to demolish a heavily defended position at Hillman, a strategic complex that had, until then, withstood hours of relentless naval bombardment and aerial attacks. Such individuals epitomized the spirit and resolve of the engineers, many of whom were volunteers from the Royal Engineering Corps taking on some of the most perilous roles in the invasion. They understood instinctively that survival depended on tactical speed and aggressive action. Closing the distance quickly enough to deploy their petard mortars before German anti-tank weapons could neutralize them. It was a deadly game of seconds where hesitation meant almost certain death, and they played it like a high-stakes match of tactical chess, risking everything to accomplish their mission. However, the German defensive strategy, carefully refined through grueling years on the Eastern Front, had been built on the premise of overwhelming mass gunfire and fortified positions, such as the formidable MG-42 machine gun emplacements that had slaughtered thousands of Soviet soldiers. Yet these well-established tactics proved utterly inadequate against the modern innovations introduced by the Allies. Instead of adapting, the Germans found themselves caught unprepared. Their defenses, designed to anticipate traditional assault methods, were fragile when faced with specialized, heavily armored assault vehicles that could bypass their static defenses in moments, threatening their core positions and tactics. The Atlantic Wall, notorious for its vast resources, extensive fortifications, and propaganda value, long symbolized Hitler's insurmountable fortress, an impenetrable barrier meant to deter any invasion. When the D-Day landings commenced, however, this seemingly invulnerable barrier shattered within a single day. The Allied forces' new weapons, especially the specialized armored vehicles, notably the Churchill AVRES, were designed to counteract static defenses, and their effectiveness rendered the German defenses obsolete virtually overnight. The massive, elaborate defenses that had been painstakingly constructed to prevent invasion proved fragile in the face of these new offensive tactics. Post-war analysis by the German General Staff, conducted while many of their officers remained in Allied captivity, revealed critical flaws in their strategic planning. In particular, they identified the failure to anticipate and counter the specific countermeasures mounted by specialized assault vehicles, which had played a decisive role in their defeat. The General Staff acknowledged that the British Churchill AVRES and similar vehicles had temporarily invalidated years' worth of defensive preparation, transforming what were considered strong, seemingly impregnable positions into death traps almost instantaneously. This recognition marked a fundamental turning point in military thought. Officers who had previously dismissed Allied innovations as inferior or insignificant now understood that the nature of modern warfare was changing rapidly. The importance of these armored vehicles and their tactics extended well beyond just the war years. Their influence shaped military doctrine through subsequent decades, illustrating the critical need to adapt constantly to emerging technological threats, not merely to defend static fortifications, but to consider dynamic, offensive solutions. Throughout the Cold War era and extending well into the modern age, military engineering doctrines have been profoundly shaped and constantly refined by ongoing global conflicts and technological advancements. Every major military power, whether facing off against the Soviet Union or other adversaries, invested heavily in developing specialized vehicles designed to overcome fortified defenses. This evolution ranges from the Soviet IMR engineer vehicles, built to breach heavy fortifications, to the Israeli Puma combat engineering vehicle, a versatile machine tailored for a wide array of engineering tasks in combat zones. All these innovations share a common heritage rooted in lessons learned from past conflicts, emphasizing the importance of technological adaptability in modern warfare. The foundational principles underlying combat engineering have their origins in the innovations of the past, such as the tanks used by the British during World War II. The Churchill tanks, notably, were modified with specialized equipment to demolish fortified German bunkers, exemplifying the early integration of engineering expertise into tank design. These modifications laid the groundwork for contemporary combat engineering strategies, which still incorporate the core idea of deploying powerful demolition charges from protected platforms. Over the decades, technological progress has transitioned from rudimentary spigot mortar systems mounted on tanks to highly sophisticated missile delivery systems capable of neutralizing even the most heavily fortified positions from a distance. Despite these technological developments, the human element, the stories of soldiers and engineers who operated and relied on these weapons, remains one of the most compelling aspects of military history. Throughout history, numerous individual accounts reveal the intense human drama behind the evolution of military technology. For example, German machine gunners faced dauntless moments of desperation as they fired in a last-ditch effort against the advancing Allied forces, knowing their weapons could do little to halt the relentless assault. On the other hand, British engineers risked their lives to get close enough to enemy bunkers with petard mortar devices, an early form of explosive demolition, highlighting the crucial physical risk that engineers undertook to neutralize entrenched defenses. Japanese soldiers, caught in the chaos of retreat or surrender, often faced harrowing choices: to burn alive inside trenches and bunkers or abandon their positions, forsaking their honor and sworn duties to death. These personal stories, preserved in memoirs, formal unit histories, and interviews, offer a visceral understanding of how technological innovations have outright transformed the nature of combat. They illustrate how something as seemingly simple as adding a spigot mortar to a Churchill tank could turn a seemingly safe defensive position into a death trap, underscoring the constant arms race between offensive and defensive capabilities in warfare. A lasting symbol of wartime innovation is the MG-42 machine gun, a weapon which not only survived the trials of World War II, but also left an indelible mark on subsequent firearm design. Its core mechanism was so robust and effective that it served as a blueprint for many post-war machine guns, including the American M60 and the Belgian FNAG. This enduring influence testifies to the MG-42's fundamental reliability and sophistication as a weapon system. Yet its story also stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of relying excessively on a single tactical or technological solution. The German military, aiming to maximize the potential of the MG-42 machine gun, devoted much of its defensive doctrine to creating fixed positions that leveraged the weapon's superiority in controlled sectors. This strategy, while initially effective, proved inherently vulnerable once opponents developed methods to neutralize these positions. Advanced demolition techniques could eliminate these fixed strongholds with ease, exposing a critical flaw in the initial approach. In the larger context of the Second World War, this clash of ideas between traditional, firepower-based defensive tactics centered around machine guns like the MG-42 and innovative approaches employing specialized engineering vehicles embodies the ongoing struggle to adapt military doctrine to changing technological realities. The encounter between the German reliance on MG-42 fueled defenses and inventive Allied engineering solutions, like the Armored Vehicle Royal Engineer AVRE, demonstrates this ongoing tension throughout the conflict. Despite its reputation as a society committed to innovation and tactical excellence, the German military's defensive doctrine was surprisingly conservative. Instead of evolving rapidly in response to battlefield experiences, they clung to concepts that had proven effective in earlier conflicts, even when evidence began to mount that these strategies were outdated in the face of Allied technological advances. As the Allies pushed into Germany during the final stages of World War II, especially in the year 95, German defenses showed signs of adaptation, dispersing and concealing MG-42 machine gun positions rather than maintaining vulnerable overt bunkers. These lessons, learned from the Normandy invasion, revealed an understanding that static defenses had become less effective in the face of faster, more mobile warfare. Regrettably, by the time these adaptive measures were put into practice, it was often too late for the Germans. The combined industrial and technological power of the Allied forces had produced vast quantities of specialized vehicles capable of breaching and neutralizing even the most meticulously prepared defenses. The Allied side had anticipated many of these vulnerabilities and invested heavily in developing innovative engineering equipment designed to confront and demolish fortified positions wherever they appeared. This relentless industrial effort, the last units to surrender in May of 1945, were the crews manning the once rampant MG-42 machine guns, units that had endured almost the entire duration of the war. Their saga began amidst the fiery triumphs of 1940, when their weapons symbolized the might and dominance of the battlefield, and spanned all the way to the catastrophic defeats of 1945, which marked the end of an era. These soldiers and their weapons witnessed firsthand the dramatic evolution of warfare, transforming from tools wielded for swift, overwhelming victories into relics of obsolescence in the face of rapidly advancing technology. The story of the MG-42's decline encapsulates more than just a military defeat. It reflects a profound shift in the nature of combat itself. In August 1945, the Japanese officially surrendered, A capitulation accelerated and made unavoidable by the devastating atomic bombings and the relentless Soviet invasion of Manchuria. These events prevented what was once planned as an extensive invasion of Japan's homeland, an operation that had been meticulously prepared for years. Due to the Japanese people's intense militarization and preparedness to oppose invaders with primitive yet fiercely motivated tactics, ranging from bamboo spears to dedicated suicide attacks, the potential for a human tragedy of unprecedented scale loomed large. The entire nation had been conditioned to resist invasion at all costs, and millions of civilians had been imbued with the belief that even with minimal weaponry, they could inflict serious damage and deter the advancing armies. However, U.S. and Allied military planners had anticipated such fierce resistance and had already developed countermeasures designed to intensify the struggle further. They had ordered the large-scale manufacture of specialized armored vehicles, including flamethrower tanks, aimed at breaking through the most heavily fortified Japanese defenses. These vehicles represented an evolution in assault technology, terror weapons intended to annihilate entrenched cave positions, dugouts and fortified bunkers that traditional troop movements struggled to dislodge. Had the invasion gone forward, the campaign would likely have devolved into an even more harrowing humanitarian catastrophe, with the potential for countless additional casualties on both sides. Lessons learned from past battles had informed military strategy profoundly. The brutal combat at Okinawa, where flamethrower tanks had been used to systematically destroy complex underground cave systems, exemplified the effectiveness of such specialized vehicles. Predictions indicated that in an invasion of Japan, these armored firefighting machines would dominate the conflict, causing the vast majority of Japanese casualties by obliterating entrenched defenses that had once seemed impregnable. The anticipated scale and ferocity of this operation underscored the importance of technological adaptiveness and force projection, principles that continue to underpin modern military planning. A comparative examination of the defensive failures faced by German, Japanese, and Italian forces against allies equipped with innovative armored and technological systems reveals recurring themes. Overconfidence in fixed defenses, such as bunkers, concrete fortifications, or cave systems, often prove to be misguided. Likewise, the inability or unwillingness to adapt rapidly to new, more powerful offensive methods consistently led to defeat. The psychological trauma inflicted upon defenders, embodied by the collapse of morale upon recognizing that previously thought impregnable positions offered little real protection, highlighted a critical failure that military strategists analyze to this day. These lessons underscore the importance of flexibility, innovative thinking, and humility when confronting emerging threats on the battlefield. The tragic fate of MG-42 crews, whether dying within their bunkers at Normandy, Japanese soldiers burning amid their cave defenses at Okinawa, or Italian troops scattering in disarray from their positions along the Gothic Line, all shared a common misjudgment, an over-reliance on the belief that raw firepower and sturdy fortifications alone could withstand the relentless advance of new, more effective assault technologies. The core error was trusting that traditional defensive measures could hold against the relentless march of innovation. In the present era, with military forces everywhere grappling to contend with threats once considered science fiction, such as drones, precision-guided munitions, and cyber warfare, the compelling story of how the seemingly insignificant flying dustbin, an armored vehicle, defeated the formidable MG-42 remains strikingly relevant. It stands as a stark reminder that no defensive setup is truly invulnerable. Speed of innovation and adaptability continue to be essential components for survival in the modern battlefield. As conflicts evolve, the next decisive breakthrough will likely come from the development of an equivalent to the revolutionary armored equipment of the past, the modern Avri of the 21st century, designed to outmaneuver and outthink any opposition. The concrete bunkers that still dot the Normandy beaches today, transformed from battlefields of despair into memorials and tourist attractions, serve as enduring monuments. They symbolize not merely the bravery of the soldiers who faced their enemies amid the chaos, but also the power of inventive thinking to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. These relics remind us that with ingenuity, resilience, and a willingness to innovate, Even the most formidable defenses can be rendered obsolete. This lesson's from D.